I am recording, so we are
Oh,
good.
okay. This story of the curse of Bairdstown was first published in Charles Evers' Pioneer Scrapbook, and it begins with Jim Slater's curse. Is there an avenging nemesis hanging over Bairdstown on the account of the curse of a ruined man? And Charles Evers says the following weird, uncanny incident came in the experience of Mr. C.W. Evers during his term as sheriff in the later 1860s when the county seat was still at Perrysburg. And Charles Evers says, I'll give you the story as I recall it, and you may draw your own conclusions whether you believe it or not. Now, Jim Slater was an early pioneer in Wood County, and old Jim that he wrote was not considered very bright, or rather, some of his neighbors doubted at times in his right reason was rightly balanced. He was rough and uncouth in manner, inclined to be irritable and violent when he imagined he was being imposed upon. Of course, his wife was just the opposite. His wife, who was an estimable woman, far above Slater, sickened and died soon after this Slater's misfortune began. William McMurray, Slater's neighbor, also was an early pioneer in southern Wood County near North Baltimore. William McMurray, a neighbor, put a piece of wheat on Slater's land on shares. At harvesting, Slater objected to the grain being hauled off the farm for threshing. A sharp war of words between Slater and McMurray began with much feelings grew out of this trivial affair. Slater swore that wheat would never do McMurray, his neighbor, any good. Upon this curse, the matter rested until some weeks later when one night the wheat stacks were burned and a new harness and some other articles were stolen from McMurray's barn nearby. Slater, who was not a favorite of his neighbors, was of course set upon at once among the gossips as the instigator. No evidence could be found against him except that assertion that he made in anger that wheat would never do him any good. Of course, on this slender thread and a good deal of prejudice, Slater was arrested and tried before a justice. After heavy expenses in lawyers' fees and other ways, Slater was acquitted. This prosecution or persecution, as Slater termed it, was the cause of his ruin. The lawyers, Slater's lawyers, got notes secured by mortgages on Slater's farm and began proceeding of foreclosure. The lawyers, of course, stole his farm. At last, the evil day came, and the sheriff, with an order of sale, came with appraisers to value of the property. And of course, the sheriff was Charles Evers himself. Slater's only hope was that none of his neighbors would bid on the farm when it was offered. Of course, this did not happen. The day the sale came, there was only one buyer, John Baird, a prosperous farmer. And Slater goes to the sheriff, Charles Evers. He states that I have no friends. I am robbed of my place and driven from my home. If there is a just God, he will curse the place to the last end of eternity as a warning. That farm will never do John Baird any good. He wanted my place, he has got it. And the curse of a wronged man goes with that place and all who have had a hand in robbing me. Now, James Slater, like I said, intersects with the Wood County Infirmary. James Slater died a pauper and is buried in an unmarked grave at the infirmary. Now, what happened to Slater's property? On Slater's old farm where the B&O Railroad located its line, John Baird, with the enterprising characteristics of himself, laid out a town, giving it his name, Bairdstown. And he built a fine flouring mill, a hotel, and the town grew rapidly. And that is the Baird Steel Company flour mill with the B&O Railroad right behind it. It's interesting we have that drawn because we now know what it looked like at one time. And at one time, Bairdstown had many things in it at about this time. At about this time, misfortunes one after another began to stop at Baird's door. His downward career commenced in litigation. Lawsuit after lawsuit harassed him. Creditors pressed him on every side. Next in line of bad luck, his fine flour mill burned, attributed to, as Charles Evers puts it, incendiarism, arson. What else? According to the historical record of Wood County, the Beers book in 1897, the events that wiped out Bairdstown in the 1890s occurred. The first fire occurred on July 8th, 1890, and destroyed Hearst Saloon. Not very long after, July 17th of that same year, destroyed Hearson's and Grimes drugstore. On July 26, 1890, the Ogden block was burned. July 28th of that same year, 4 barns were burned down. And shortly after, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad wrecked on February 14th, 1890, with much loss of life and property. Finally, as if in sheer desperation, Charles Evers writes, against the bootless fight he was making against fate, Baird gathered up what little he could from the wreck and went to Arkansas. His daughter sickened and died later on the final blow and the loss of his beloved but heartbroken wife. David Hayes, Slater's lawyer who had stole his farm, fell into hard times, into the clutch of remorseless creditors. His daughter also died, and his wife, bereft of her reason, died shortly after. George Strain, the prosecuting attorney, went insane later on and died afterwards in an insane asylum. Now, all of this is kind of difficult to prove. We do know that James Slater is recorded as being one of the first 150 residents in Bloom Township in 1839. He was there. We do know there was a William McMurray, and he was a Bloom Township trustee from 1873 to 1874. We know that Bairdstown was plotted by Josiah Baird in 1874. There were several Josiah Bairds, however. According to Ancestry.com, Josiah Baird is buried in Bloom Township in 1927, not in Arkansas. His wife, Lorinda, died in 1923 after living long lives. George Strain died in 1890, same year as his wife, and they are both buried in Perrysburg. I can find no evidence that they were in an insane asylum. But one thing I can prove, this is the 1870 census of Wood County and the inhabitants of Center Township at the county home. And highlighted was James Slater, age 57, male, white, and insane. So we do know that he died here at the county home. Now, Charles Evers died on July 29th, 1909, at the age of 72. His remains were taken to the Grand Army of the Republic, kind of like the American Legion for Civil War soldiers, rooms at the City Hall in Bowling Green. There, the full ritualistic services of that patriotic order were observed, and flowers were provided by the Maumee Valley Pioneer and Historical Association, which Charles Evers helped found the very first historical association in Wood County that I know of. Evers' Pioneer Scrapbook was published in 1910, a year after he died, with the postscript, "Lest we forget." Now, the Wood County Museum is now open weekends from 1 to 4 through November, and we're open Monday through Friday from 10 to 4. We have admissions for adults, seniors, students, veterans, and younger kids. If you are a member, you always get into the Wood County Museum for free. If you have not been at the museum in a while, on the right, for comfort and convenience, tells the history of the Ohio poor farms. Above us in that photo of ruins is a poor farm in southern Ohio. We have photos of what's left of every county home in Ohio. New is people, places, and things shown on the left. We have thousands of photos of Wood County, some from our time period, some from 100 years before our time period, on display. If you ever saw Mary Bach's fingers, we have a new exhibit, the Mary and Carl Bach story. On display in a museum quality case is ephemera from that murder and information that has never been made public about who Mary Bach was and who Carl Bach was. Every Friday, I post a history post on our Facebook page, which is always updated. Our website, which also is always updated, is woodcountyhistory.org. If you've not been to the museum in a while, we also have a large, fully serviceable elevator from the new parking behind the building, a short walk into that large elevator. If you remember how steep the county home stairs are, now if you have friends who can't make it, they can take that elevator from ground floor into first and second floors. That is the last slide I have, and I will stop sharing my screen if I can stop share. There we go. And I think we're back.